If you've got a leadership academy named after you and you've been in business for 25 years, you're probably pretty good at leadership. Today's guest is a pro. Welcome to Decision Points. I'm Doug Hudson.
I'm Scott Wood.
Welcome Rand Stagen, CEO of Stagen Leadership Academy. How we doing?
Great to be here. Good morning, gentlemen.
You wore blue. You see you're a pro at this. You know blue is the universal color that we all look best in.
Yeah. Well, I didn't. You guys didn't wear these colors, so I don't know what that says.
Oh, shoot.
You're just a little bit more. you're just a little bit more veterans than I am a rookie here in this context.
We messed up. See, we got to get better moment already.
Been looking forward to this one for a long time.
Yeah.
So we started this last fall, and you were on the short list right out of the gate. So I'm glad we're able to do it today.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, and we've been in this journey together for decades now. So it's going to be fun to see where the conversation goes.
Yeah.
All right. So how'd y'all meet?
I guess EO probably was where we first met.
Entrepreneurs Organization, which to age ourselves used to be called YEO, Young Entrepreneurs Organization. Okay. So we met when we were early 20s entrepreneurs. Building, just starting and building our businesses. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it was a different business at the time. So yeah, it was more than 25 years ago. Really aging ourselves.
It's okay. It's just being honest.
It's all right.
We'll come back to this later, but we call that decading.
Yeah, we'll call that, we'll get into that later.
Yeah.
Versus short-termer or short-timer. So just briefly as we get started, Rand, what's Stagen Leadership Academy all about? What do y'all wake up wanting to do and change every day?
Yeah, so as Scott knows, we started the business in 1999. So this year is our 25th anniversary. We just celebrated. So it's very exciting. And we are a leadership academy, a physical brick and mortar, let's call it most people would say we're in the exec ed space, the executive education space. So we compete with universities and we work with business owners, entrepreneurs, senior executives, always at the CEO level first when we work with a new organization that are individuals wanting to find more of their untapped potential. And so we're really in the potential business of helping leaders discover and fulfill the promise of their potential. And that's our actual stated purpose statement.
So where are you from? Where were you raised? And
I grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut.
Okay.
And experienced my first 18 years of weather at that part of the country, and did a college tour with my father when I was a sophomore summer. Okay. And came through everywhere from California to Arizona to Texas to New Orleans. And when I hit SMU, was my number one choice. And so it hit the two metrics for what I was looking for at that age, which was warm weather and pretty girls.
Yeah.
And and it was where I would end up, and that's how I got to Dallas.
Yeah. So very thoughtful process, I could tell.
Just in the spirit of full transparency, right?
I love transparency.
Yes.
So is it one of those things like you just got on campus and you're like, this is it?
Yeah, it's an indescribable feeling. Yeah, really. Yeah. I got on the campus and it's just such a beautiful space, and I'll never forget. I was like, this is where I need to be. Mm-hmm. And it was something around the combination of the campus itself, the weather, something about Dallas that I couldn't actually describe at the time. It was a welcoming city. It had an electricity that I would later come to describe as an entrepreneurial sort of center of gravity. Yeah. And that's what has kept me here, because when I arrived, I thought it would be similar to New York, outside of New York, where it's a little bit more transactional. People are kind of doing their own thing. Mm-hmm. And when I got to Dallas and when I got to really Texas, this Southern hospitality was very unfamiliar to me.
Yep. Yeah.
And when I started my first business in college, I found myself getting all the support from people. And they were like, we want to see you succeed. We want to see you win because you're from Dallas and we're from Dallas. And that means that when you're winning, we're winning. And that was a very surreal experience. Mm-hmm. And that has been for 3 decades. That's been consistent. That's what's really what I think I'm most proud of being a part of this business community is the welcoming entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah, absolutely. Back when we were all going to college, most people didn't tour the country like that and look at. So what was it about your parents that said, "Hey son, let's go to California, let's go to Arizona, let's go to Texas, let's look," because there are plenty of schools on the East Coast that would have been more than adequate.
Yeah, I've actually never been asked that question, and I haven't even thought about it. It was almost just an assumption. My father went to UCLA, grew up in California. My mother also went to Stanford, grew up in California. They met in New York, in the sort of East Coast, where I was, born in New York and raised in Connecticut. And so I think my sister was 3 years ahead of me at Northwestern, and so it was always just normal that my grandparents were in California, my sister was in Chicago, and so I was just it didn't even have a register that I wouldn't look all over the country.
Yeah,
and so, but it's an interesting question, right?
Yeah, but
a regional.
And if your parents were from California, they were like, "This is our chance to get back to the South." So we're at least going to get to some warm weather when we visit Rand, because Chicago's no warm spot, obviously.
Well, when I got here, I thought within the first couple of years that I would end up in California. Genuinely, that was the plan. My college roommate and I had a pact, and he's like, "I'm going to go." And I was like, I'll be right there, just
right behind you.
Right behind you. And he got into the film business. He was very successful. He's like, when are you coming? When are you coming? And I'd already started my business that was building momentum. And the next thing I know, I turned my face, and this is my life. Decades later.
Here you are, 30 years later. Yeah.
Tell us about growing up in Connecticut. You have one sister. One
older sister, 3 years older. Yep.
Yeah. What were you into? What were some flashpoints, whether it's personal, schooling? What are some memories that you said, I'm not going to do that again, or that's a life lesson I've learned?
It's an interesting question that I thought about last week. I was with a group of CEOs, and we were talking about what's happening in the culture right now. Sort of the culture wars, the polarization. We often are counseling our clients, our team, on very complex leadership challenges. And I went back to my high school in the conversation, and I had explained how growing up in the 1980s, I graduated high school in 1988. So this was Ronald Reagan. This was the evil empire. This was Red Dawn. I'm going to age myself. And for those who are listening or watching my favorite film of that time. And I was incredibly patriotic. Like that's what that was in me. I was a high school football player, all conference, very into sports, very into the country, very shaped by Reagan's ideology in a more traditional way. And then what's interesting is when I came to SMU and I got into my 20s and I got early into my career, I moved away from that sort of traditional, let's call it foundation. And I found myself in my 20s and 30s resonating less and less with those early values. And it wasn't until I got into my 40s that I actually returned back and almost reclaimed those early, let's call them kind of childhood and high school positives.
Interesting.
But it was really interesting. I was telling the group for many years, I didn't have any negative feelings around those principles, but it was almost like they were compartmentalized. And I integrated them in a way that I feel more patriotic today at 53 than I have ever felt in my life. But if you were to talk to myself, my 33-year-old self,
interesting, I
was like, no, I'm more of like a citizen of the world, and I think America's great, but I didn't feel it in my bones. And I feel it in my bones now in a way that's incredibly empowering.
And why do you think that transitioning is happening? Is that
the topic that we're seeing around conflict in this particular moment in the summer of 2024? There's a lot of unrest on college campuses around what's happening in the Middle East. But if it's not that, it was George Floyd in 2020. If it's not that, it was the climate, over the last 10 to 15 years, which has been getting a lot of attention. And so people say, climate change, there's so much conflict in America. Let's just stay with America over that. Or they're talking about race relations or income inequality or, what's going on in the Middle East. And I always thought, when I was younger, that was about what was on the surface. And what I have been learning, and I'm still learning, is that those are actually downstream as symptoms of the real root cause of the conflict. And the real root cause of the conflict, I'm going to assert, is around worldviews. And when a traditional worldview comes into a conflict with a more progressive worldview. And so to oversimplify sort of the traditional right on conservatives and the more progressive left, that is, of let's call it progressives, when they're coming together in conflict, that's very confusing to a lot of people. Like, what's going on there? And the reality is, to answer your question of like, why am I reintegrating, is I started to recognize that there were things about what the conservatives were trying to conserve, which made sense. It's like, this is a group of people who want to protect and preserve what's right with America. There's a lot of things about America that we need to protect. And then on the left, you've got the progressives saying, we need to fix what's wrong with America. And I'm also like, well, yeah, there's a lot of things about America that we need to fix. And so how do we actually recognize that both of these, let's call them narratives, both of these ideologies are partially true? If that conflict is happening, how do we also recognize that the conflict itself, sometimes I'll say like tectonic plates banging into each other, we need that conflict. And we need both of those groups to stand for what they're standing for, because eventually there will be like a mountain that emerges out of those plates coming together. There will eventually be an elevated mountain that will emerge, or a synthesis. And so I can't in myself pursue that synthesis unless I'm actually able to find in myself, not intellectually, but in my own body, in my bones, I have to find the parts of myself that actually are traditional and the parts of myself that are progressive. And then I have to say, okay, you know, those are two elements that are really critical. And how do I actually pursue a synthesis, a higher order synthesis? And that is, and that's been incredibly, that's why we use the word empowering. It's been incredibly empowering. Tom Peters, the old management guru from In Search of Excellence, he had a saying that I stumbled upon in 2020 after George Floyd. And he said, if you're not confused, you're not paying attention. And I was like, I am really confused. Like, I was so confused in 2020. And the more I dove into the situation to try to understand, the more confused I got.
That's right.
And so I realized after several years that I was actually on to something. And now I'm a little bit less confused, just a little bit. I'm finding a sense of almost flow of being able to, for those that are watching on video, you won't need me to describe this, but I'm clenching my fists. And so this idea of less of the clenched fist and more of the open hand. So it's like less of this and more of this. And so that's counterintuitive to a lot of leaders who are alpha, strong, business owners, leaders. They're saying, I can't relax into the quote opposition because then they'll win and I'll lose. And that's a different game. I'm not playing that zero-sum game to the degree that I used to.
In the open hand, there's common ground. Like, right, that's where you find the common ground on either side. And only when you find the common ground can you begin to, align and figure out how you move forward together.
Yeah, and what's beautiful about this is people say, we need to find common ground. And we all realize that common ground is necessary, but not sufficient to where we need to go as a country. And so common ground becomes the shared humanity, where instead of dehumanizing each other, we find our shared humanity, and then that's foundational to the move from common ground to higher ground. And so how do we actually say it's not just about common ground? Common ground is where we have to stand.
We build some trust. And then from the common ground, we can move to a higher ground. We can move to, and that's really my pursuit, is the pursuit of higher ground. And that is a lifelong pursuit that I'll be in for, likely the rest of my life. And I share with people, don't worry, it'll get worse before it gets better. Okay? Because where we are right now in 2024, it is not likely going to get better. It's only going to get worse, which is why leaders really have, I propose, a disproportionate responsibility. I know it's a cliche, but to be the change they want to see in the world, and we have to do our own work. We can't just outsource this to the government and outsource this to
to nonprofits. I mean, we've got to participate. The three of us and everyone listening, we've got to be a part of the solution. And that requires a journey that most leaders are honestly not up for. One
of our guests, Darren Babcock, who founded Bonton Farms, we've released one podcast. We actually had him on for a second. The second one hasn't released yet, but we just kept asking him that question, Rand, about getting involved, and you see that need. And I just loved, he just kept telling Scott and myself, it's proximity. Just where are you? Just find it right next to you. And we cannot be bystanders. It's you have to engage this work. So you go to SMU. We understand your thought process was extremely sophisticated, but you did graduate.
I did graduate.
Walk us through kind of graduation and first jobs come out of SMU.
Got to SMU, got very involved in social life, got very involved in fraternities, joined Phi Gamma Delta, Fiji. I have a tattoo on my ankle to prove it, which at 19 seemed like a really good idea.
But you still have it.
Yes,
but it's maybe fading a little bit.
It's not actually fading at all.
And you have a few colleagues who might be listening to this who probably have the same. I've seen a few of them on their ankles.
Let's just say that that Patrick's tattoo parlor, which was down on Harry Hines, it was the only tattoo parlor. There was no tattoo parlors.
Right.
There was no Deep Ellum.
That's right.
And we got down there as a group of, my pledge brothers are probably 15 of us, probably 2 o'clock in the morning, probably after losing our judgment that evening. And
fully sober is what
you're saying. We're like, sounds like a good idea. Let's go get tattoos. And
this is a great idea.
That's a great idea. And my roommate that went to LA that didn't get the tattoo, I go, you don't understand. Someday I'm going to be sitting in a steam room at a country club and someone's going to look down at my ankle and they're going to see that Phi Gamma Delta tattoo and they're going to say, Fiji. They're going to give me the sort of secret handshake and we're going to do business together. And that happened 25 years later. I got one client as a result of that Fiji tattoo so far.
Okay, so clearly your roommate is the smartest guy in the bunch,
yes,
clearly.
Exactly. He was there. He just didn't get the tattoo. He watched us.
Great restraint that night.
Yeah, because I'm sure he wasn't being bullied and shamed.
Yeah. Did you major in business?
I did not major in business. I majored in political science.
Okay.
And I did the fraternity roles, got involved, became Rush chairman for 2 years in a row. Sort of, really, in all seriousness, people say, what was the point of being a Rush chairman, which you're recruiting and you're selling and you're building trust and you're building intimacy with people that you want to join your quote club. And it was an amazing way for me to build capacity of how to be in relationship with others.
Yeah.
And something I enjoyed, but something that got honed in that role. And then ultimately, I have never said this in a public setting, but I did ultimately senior year become a homecoming king. I was voted homecoming king, which my wife and kids, when they first heard that, when my kids were old enough, they're like, "That's not true." And I have the clippings.
You had to prove it right.
I have the proof, and so I was very into the social fraternity sorority scene. Built a lot of wonderful relationships.
Yeah.
And then when I was a sophomore in college, I started I bought from a fraternity brother a little phone directory called the Greek Directory. And he was graduating. He's like, "Hey, give me $300 and you can publish this." And it was the phone numbers of all the sorority girls, Kappa Kappa Gamma, and then all their landlines, and then all the fraternities and their landlines. And we would sell ads in the summer, collect everyone's phone numbers the first couple of weeks of school, and then print it like old school offset printing and saddle stitch. And then we'd print 3,000 copies and hand them out to the fraternity and sorority members. And that would be the reference of you meet someone at a bar, especially the guys, they're like, "What's your name?" "Oh, my name is Phoebe and I'm a Theta." And then you just go to the Theta list and find the one Phoebe and the one landline, and that's how you would follow up. And so
incredible.
Yeah, the pre-Facebook.
Well, exactly. This is the essence of Facebook, 100%.
Yeah, that's how it worked.
Yeah.
So how long did you run that business?
My sophomore year, my junior year, and then the daily newspaper called the Daily Campus. The sales director, who was a full-time employee of the school, he called me and said, "Hey, you're graduating. we'd like to potentially buy the Greek Directory because it was very popular.
Yeah,
and they were like, we'd love to have that as part of our publishing offerings.
Yep.
And so we spent 2 hours together. He brought a yellow notepad. He asked me, how do you print it? How do you sell? How do you get the phone numbers? I gave him all the information. And then at the end of the 2 hours, he looked at me and he said, thanks for all the information. I think we'll just do it ourselves next year. And I was like, oh, that really?
You learned it.
You're okay. And so what did I do that summer? I started a newspaper. And my senior year, I actually came at the Daily Campus with what became the Student Voice, which was a tabloid every 2-week newspaper to compete with the Daily Campus. And we came in and crushed them. My senior year, from a readership and from a popularity standpoint, with at least the demographic I was going after. And I did the directory and the newspaper that senior year. And then when I graduated, I went to University of North Texas in Denton, and I started a newspaper for their campus.
Interesting.
And then I continued to do that for 2 more years while I raised money from a group of, but became 37 investors. So when I was 21, I did my first private placement. I had no idea what I was doing.
Yep.
Which probably helped me because I was completely naive.
Yep.
Ray Balestri, who was someone that Scott and I have known a long time. He was a corporate attorney. Brady Wood and I were friends because we went to school together at SMU, and he was a big advertiser. He had the Green Elephant and the Rhythm Room, and he would advertise in my phone directory and in my newspaper.
Yep.
He said, I know a lawyer, right? He's the only person I knew who knew a lawyer. And I sat down with Ray, and Ray said, what do you need? And I go, I want to raise $250,000. And he's like, well, how are you going to raise it? I was like, I'm just going to go ask people for it. And he's like, you're selling a security. And I was like, what's a security? Because I wasn't a business major. So Ray became my first, mentor and advisor, and guided me through that process. And we raised the money. I raised the money, started a city paper to compete with the Dallas Observer, and folded the 2 university papers, regional papers, into that. And we launched in 1994, and it was a readership initially of 60,000 readers a week.
Wow!
And that paper, I did that for my 20s, for all intents and purposes. I was in the publishing and newspaper business with the Met, which was the primary flagship paper.
Yep.
And then we had several other publications, a fashion magazine. We actually published Texas Business Magazine for a period of time, which was a statewide glossy paid publication.
Interesting.
So when Scott and I met, I was in the publishing business as fellow entrepreneurs.
You always been competitive? Would you consider yourself competitive? Or were you just so hacked off that you got kind of stolen the intellectual capital from the newspaper? I mean, you immediately went and said, I'm going to go get better than you.
I feel like if you were to ask my wife if I'm competitive, she would probably say no. I'm intense.
Okay.
And when I am motivated, I have tremendous resilience.
Yep.
And so I was highly motivated by that situation, and I felt like I was treated without. There was an integrity question.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that was I felt like a mini betrayal, even though it was only a 2-hour meeting. Like, I put myself out there.
Yep.
Yeah.
I exposed myself. I extended a generous sort of assumption that this was a conversation that was happening in good faith.
Yep.
And it was an amazing life lesson. But it was the motivation to actually be on the side of righteousness.
Yeah.
And I've got to be careful when I say righteousness, because my 23-year-old self would say it was about righteousness. And the positive of that is it's generative and it drives results and performance. The shadow side of righteousness is we actually think that, going back to polarization, that I'm right and you're wrong, and that is the clenched fist. And
that's the zero-sum game.
That's the zero-sum game.
There's no compromise ever. I really appreciate your answer. Well, it's honest, and you didn't react and respond to competitor. Yeah, you saw the violation, betrayal, and said, I'm going to do something, not necessarily to beat down, but I'm gonna make it right again from your perspective.
Was there ever a follow-up conversation with that guy, like a year later, 2 years later, 5 years later? No, just that 1 2 hour meeting and that was it.
That 1 2 hour. I mean, I haven't talked about this probably in decades.
And you're like, I'm off to the races.
His name was Glenn.
Yeah. Yep.
I remember that.
Yep.
And I found out years later that he was selling women's shoes at a department store.
Yep.
And so my ego was like, okay, what happened to him? And so, but I haven't thought about it. This is more than 30 years now.
Yep.
Well, it's interesting. Like when I was young in the business, I had a couple of experiences like that. And they do serve as great motivators because you're like, okay, fine. You don't have to, my circumstances were a little bit different, but it was basically somebody rejecting what we were, offering at that time. And, they were better. They had it all figured out. And I was like, okay, we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. And
We'll
this
see.
is because I'm
not with an arrogance, but it just became a motivator and a driver. And resilience. I like the way you said that a minute ago.
I like you saying that it kind of can spark a motivate. It can be a motivator.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think for me early on, I was motivated to win so you could lose. And that was a little bit more focusing on the problem or the competition. And what I've shifted towards is the question of what are you aiming at?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And now at this stage in my life, I'm finding myself not trying to hurt something else, but offer an alternative and basically say, what I'm going to do is I'm going to participate in, stand for, and be a part of a choice and let the market, because I'm a free marketer, let the market decide, hey, I've got choices and I want to choose the best value for me as the customer or as the stakeholder. And so that's, right now I feel a very similar inner state than I did talking about this early experience with the newspaper, but it's on a more global scale of what we're doing at the Stagen Leadership Academy. And people say, what are you trying to do? And we're saying we are very drawn to this synthesis of the best that has come before and opening up for what is yet to come.
Yep.
So we're all about kind of progression and evolution. And there's a concern that I have that I'll just personalize this of what's happening to the country right now as it relates to so many young people who are trying to dismantle or destroy what we have as opposed to try to improve what we have.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so a part of me wants to see them as the enemy. That this goes back to Glenn as the enemy.
Yep.
Right.
As opposed to saying, well, how do we simply lead them, those that are willing and able, lead them towards a vision that is a vision of a future state that allows us to bring the best of classical liberal values, the best of a Judeo-Christian founding, which is the founding of this country. How do we actually bring and revitalize and renew that in a contemporary context?
Yep.
And that's about creating something that people want to be a part of,
Right.
as opposed to hurting or destroying the competitor.
Right.
I don't know if that's coming across. But that's a
Just call
subtle
them to
shift.
something. Don't run from something or tear something down.
Correct.
And
The challenge is we don't have a unifying thing to all march toward, right? Or to all move toward. Everything is very divisive. And so you have to have that one thing or some ideology or whatever that we're all like, okay, yeah, we can all agree to that.
Right.
And now let's all move toward that together, recognizing there's a lot of differences along the way.
There's a Rumi poem or a saying, and no, it's actually Voltaire. And he said something to the effect of, cherish those who pursue the truth. Like, cherish people who are in pursuit of the truth. Beware of those who find it.
Yeah.
And I think where we are right now is that so many people who are part of these major camps that are fighting feel like they have found the truth.
right.
And it's like those are opportunities to really pause and proceed thoughtfully and intentionally. And there's the great news is, from my perspective, that there is a way forward. It's very hard and it's going to take a very long time to execute, but there is a way forward or a way up. And that is, and that's where I'm thinking and focused on, most of my space, when I have white space, is this particular topic.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So
let's go back to
you sell
Jennifer.
Jennifer, your wife. Where do y'all meet? How do you meet?
I don't want to leave her out of this because I know she's going to listen to it.
I don't assume that. So Jennifer and I met when I was 30. She's 2 years younger. She was 28. We had mutual friends. We were out at a restaurant. We had a collision, met each other. It wasn't the right timing for either of us, but a few months later, collided again, kept colliding, and finding ourselves in the same, as you guys might imagine, just like the clicks when you're in your 20s, late 20s, early 30s. Basically, after my first date, it was like love at first sight, and within 3 months, I knew I was going to ask her to marry me. Within 7 months, I proposed. Got married. A year later, got married. So it happened relatively quick.
So we're big on details at decision points. So what's the restaurant y'all first collide at? You remember?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Does this involve another tattoo?
There's no tattoos. I was at a restaurant downtown, and it was called, I'm testing my long-term memory here. Yes. I remember, it'll come to me, and she was standing, I remember where she was standing. It was a high boy table. Yeah. And I remember walking over to her, and I was dating someone. She was at a different place. And so, but I remember, and this is a true story, like when I met her, there was a white light sort of radiating from her, from my perspective. I may have had a couple of drinks at that point, but she was like radiating this beautiful energy. Yep. And I remember feeling inappropriate to continue talking to her. And I was like, this is not appropriate. I'm dating someone right now. Like, I'm not gonna.
Because you were captivated.
I was very, very, very captivated. Yeah. And that was my first encounter with what would become my wife 22 years later. 22 years of marriage later. Yeah.
So between that night and when you actually decide to ask her out, how long was that time?
I would say we had a couple of we kept colliding as friends. Yep. And then I was in a competition, and I was telling her about this competition with a friend.
What kind of competition?
right up Mr. Woods' alley here. It was a fitness competition to see who could get. Rick Sapio is his name. Yeah. And he's on the YEO board, Young Entrepreneurs Organization board, and he and I were just always busting each other's chops. And I was like, I can get in a better shape than you. He's like, yeah, I can get in better shape than you. And we said, we're gonna see who can get in the best shape. We're gonna go in front of the YEO board of 15, and it's a aesthetic, right? Whoever looks the best.
I think
right?
I remember this actually.
There wasn't even a hardcore metric. It was just
whoever's gonna look the best.
Who's gonna?
So
look
you
the
guys
best?
are gonna like Mr. Universe, take your shirts off and wear Speedo
and Rand is tall and lean and smaller frame. Rick is big and thick and
Rick is a Andrew Dice Clay Goomba, short,
defensive
wide,
tackle, or just linebacker.
Yeah, very different body shape.
Yeah.
Rick, we'll let you defend yourself on another episode.
So I was telling her about the competition, and I was doing 2-a-days. I was working out with my trainer. We were both very serious about this competition, and for pride purposes, right? And I ended up winning the competition, which he continues to feel like it was rigged. Okay, he refused to accept the vote, and I won that particular competition. 5 years later, he won. We had a rematch, and he won. So
of course you did.
Of course, and Ray Balestri and I actually did one also. So those are the three, and so Jennifer said, "Well, what if you win?" And this was not romantic. It was like, if you win, let's go out for ice cream and celebrate, because I wasn't eating any ice cream. I wasn't eating anything. It was like, raw tuna out of a can. And
which is Scott's normal day.
Which is Scott's normal day. And do you need us to take a break so you can do some push-ups, by the way?
That was good.
So that's what happened is she said, let's go out. And so we went out for ice cream, and that was our first, let's call that date. And then it just went from there. And it was not expected. It was all let's just call it just unfolded in a very unexpected way.
And you got kiddos?
2 girls, 19 and 17. 19-year-old just decided last week to go to University of Michigan. Go Blue.
Go Blue.
And the younger is a sophomore at Greenhill here in Dallas.
All right. So you exit. Tell us about the exit of the media company and then the transition to what's next.
Boy, if I'm going to have to really tell the origin story here with that question.
Yeah.
So the media company went through 4 rounds of financing.
Okay.
Because we kept adding staff. When I was 23 and we launched, I had 25 full-time W-2 employees. We were publishing for tens of thousands of readers. We were doing this every week. This was not a monthly magazine. This was a weekly.
About what was your revenue when you go to launch like that?
Well, let's say the revenue was several $100,000 kind of annualized when we began. Then we quickly got to $1 million in revenue, and then $1.5 million in revenue, then $2 million in revenue, and that's how I got into YEO with the $1 million revenue threshold. And then we just, even though we had several million in revenue, we were still burning. And we were still acquiring readers and distribution points. And so we ran out of money, and we had to go out and go back to the original LPs, do a capital call, dilute several people down. So we got another $100,000. That didn't make it. Had to go out to the outside investment community, outside of our investors. And then my entire investor group, my friends, my family, and like all these people who I had sold the dream to, all got diluted out for all intents and purposes to nothing. And then one major investor came in with a potential, kind of earn in for me on performance. And then that investor tired of the continued cash burn. And so another wealthy investor came in, and then another wealthy investor came in. And so we went through multiple rounds, and it was a grit-inducing experience that strengthened me. And what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And it was my 20s were intense for sure.
So many of the people listening are building the business like now. When you look back on that, Rand, I know what that is, you just said, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. But I'm like, you're a phenomenal persuasive communicator to get that many people to continue. At some point, could you have looked outside and said, this is a bad business, get out? I guess I'd love life lessons here is, was there a moment that you all should have said, stop sooner? Is this just part of the lesson? You're committed. I think sometimes it's hard for business owners to know when to stop.
It's not working.
It's not working. And then I guess unless finally someone just tells you, you cannot get a yes anymore. Well, walk me through that mindset. And as you look back on that 25 years ago, what are you taking away from that experience?
I would start with, I don't know the answer. Okay. Sometimes I want to have an answer to a question. And sometimes I just want to appreciate the question and sort of allow myself to just live the question. And so I will likely live that question in some form or fashion for, the rest of my life. And when I was younger, my motivations were slightly different in some ways than they are now. And in many ways, they're the same. And so for me, and this is coming from someone who is a purpose-based leader, I had a very clear purpose with our city newspaper. And I believed that the Dallas Observer, which was sold to a national chain out of Phoenix, Arizona called New Times, very successful, national group of alternative newspapers, their strategy, their winning formula for when they came in and bought a local paper was called kneecap journalism. And that's their term, not mine. And they say, go into the city, find the city leaders, and kneecap them.
Interesting.
Kind of like what's happening now with the economics of outrage, where the social media companies are monetizing all the polarization.
The anger.
These guys were actually an early version of that.
Interesting.
And it was like every time I looked, I was doing my college papers, and I would look at the Dallas Observer, which was like I was being inspired by them as a same format, same size, same newsprint. And so I was like, wow, these are the big boys, and I'm doing this little college thing. Every week, the paper, once this company bought it, it was, if it bleeds, it leads. It was like how bad Dallas is, how horrible Dallas is.
Interesting.
Dallas is not safe. Dallas is not fair. Dallas is no opportunity. And I was thinking that doesn't actually align at all with my direct experience. And so what I did is I wrote a letter to the editor of the newspaper, and I basically said, thank you so much for telling me how bad the city is. And I was, mocking them, and they actually published it. And when and that was the catalyzing moment, kind of like with Glenn, to start raising money for the paper. And so why did I not give up? I stayed with it because I actually believed that I was out to protect the city of Dallas, to celebrate the city of Dallas. I felt like, and this was my 23-year-old, 21-year-old self, I felt like this company was putting a cloud over the city that I loved, and I was going to offer the light to their cloud.
Yep.
And so why I stuck with it was to stay on purpose.
Yeah.
Now, let's not be too high and mighty here. I was also driven by ego. I was driven by fear. I didn't want to fail. I didn't want to lose reputation. So I had a little bit of both. And what drives me today is actually being a part of something that I believe is important and purposeful and that the world needs.
Okay.
And so when you're leading a business and that business is an extension of what you stand for, what you care about, the reserves for backup power are very different than if it's purely a capitalistic enterprise, which is also a fine way to do it. It's just I've always attempted to do an integrated move where there's a purpose within the business. So I'm a conscious capitalist. I'm a card-carrying capitalist.
Yeah.
And I actually believe that capitalism can be done in a conscious, high trust, high integrity, value creating approach. And so I just that's my answer, is that I'm driven by purpose. What
I love about that answer is, and having known Rand for 30 years ish, is that is exactly what Stagen Leadership Academy has been about from day one. And so even though you may not have intentionally been about purpose there was something in there that was very purpose driven for you. And so it wasn't about the money. It wasn't about, maybe having a big exit or monetizing and, having a big event. It was like, no, we're going to do something that's worthwhile and that's with purpose, and let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it makes money, maybe it doesn't, but this is the right thing to do. And I love that you've carried that through your whole life, really, your whole professional life.
This is the counterintuitive part, okay? Listening to you, suggest that possibly, you're not saying this, but people might be hearing that of well, Rand doesn't have the same kind of drive for performance. Yeah. Well, the reality is when I talk to leaders, they have built and grown, which I know your listeners care about, how do I grow my business? And they've grown amazing enterprises over many years. They say that companies that focus on profit, okay, versus them that focuses on more than profit. And this is the part that's really tricky. When I talk to my private equity friends, I say, the way to maximize profit is to focus on more than profit. And they're like, what did you just say? And I said, the way to maximize your profit is to focus on more than just profit. Focus on your customers, focus on your employees, focus on your community, focus on vendor partnerships. If you focus on all of your stakeholders, you actually make more money through time than if you only focus on the money. Now, the trick here is my principle doesn't work if your time horizon is 3 years.
Right. Yeah.
If your time horizon is 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, look at all the enterprises that I think we admire, whether it's Chick-fil-A or whether it's Whole Foods, pick a Southwest Airlines, pick a cliche. Those are companies that have actually cared about way more than just making money, but they've also made billions of dollars of value. They've created that value for their shareholders and their stakeholders. And so
they've done it over decades.
It's
a really good message, because I think when, our 30-year-old self or our 35-year-old self is in a hurry.
Yeah.
You want to get it done. You want to climb the mountain quickly. You want to get to the top. You want to, plant the flag and, look at all I've done or how successful the company's been or whatever. But it takes a long time if you're going to build a purpose-driven company.
And if you want compounding return in your business, you got to be patient.
Yeah.
And you got to do, as Jim Collins would say, a 20-mile march. and just got to do it and just do it slow and just stay with it. And I was very fortunate to have some guidance from some important mentors, early on in the career of this current business, so 25 years ago, who really gave me guidance on how to be in relationship with the importance of patience and actually staying with relationship building. I'm going to Oklahoma City in 2 weeks. And if you were to say, wow, like, what is that? I'm going to see a mid-sized family-owned business. I'm going to meet with the executive team and spend a half day with them. And you'd say, wow, so that's a prospect. Yeah, it's a prospect. Well, how long is that sales cycle? 14 years.
Yeah.
I met the CEO at Blackberry Farm at an event, a YPO event that I was facilitating 14 years ago. And we've stayed in light in contact, and the timing wasn't right for him. The timing wasn't right for us. And I'm going to be having an opportunity to now turn that into, if all goes well, a new relationship, because I have actually been waiting for this time.
And my guess is you've been making little deposits into the relationship.
Absolutely.
And trying to help along the way and just be a resource and not worried about the outcome.
With no attachment to the outcome.
Yes.
And it's not that I've just been attempting to put value into him in particular. I just try to put value into everything.
Yep.
And what I have found in my own experience, this is not like reading it in a book, is that the more I create value without expecting an immediate return, through time, so many of those come back, but they come back from a different part of the system. It's not like, oh, I invest in this part of this person, and then it comes back over here. It's more like I invest in this person and nothing happens for 14 years, but 9 different people around him have actually, and probably more than 9, probably a dozen of the Oklahoma City friends that he has have gone through our program. And he's said positive things I've heard about me because I've been patient with him and didn't transact him. And it's like, it's play the long game in relationships. If you're listening to this, podcast and you're 30 years old or 35 or 40 years old, just put your head down and play the long game and create value. Just create value and just have faith that it's going to actually come back.
Rand, I love that phrase. And I don't know if you've used it like that before. Don't transact him. Don't transact
He's used
her.
it before. I've heard it before.
Yeah.
Many times.
It's a phenomenal phrase.
Well, it's the difference between transactional and transformational.
100%.
Right? Like, are you transactional in your relationships, or are you trying to somehow be transformational? And not that you have the power to transform the relationship, but you're moving beyond just this one interaction to something that's much bigger.
Yep. I'm fascinated. How does this originate into the Leadership Academy?
So I was very fortunate to meet a gentleman when I was publishing the newspaper, and it was somewhat of a random encounter. And I said, "What do you do?" And he said, "I'm an executive coach." So the origin, never told this story. I was publishing the paper. We wanted to do an article on firewalking. Tony Robbins had done this firewalk thing, and I was like, "Wow, this is kind of cool." And I'd read that there was firewalking going on at some colleges in Boston. And I was like, let's do a cover story on firewalking. That sounds cool. I was looking for different topics. So I asked around Dallas, there's no internet. I had to go in like my car to bookstores and go meet people and say, do you know anyone who knows anything about firewalking? Well, I couldn't go to Google, right? There was nowhere to go.
Right.
And so I met a guy named Brett. And Brett worked at a bookstore. He and his wife owned a bookstore, and he said, "Yeah, I actually know something about firewalking. I know someone who knows someone who actually taught Tony Robbins how to do the firewalk." And so I ended up following that lead. We did a story on firewalking. But I said, "What do you do when you're not doing this bookstore thing?" He said, "Well, I don't actually work at the bookstore. I am an executive coach." This was before executive coaching existed. Okay, this was the early 90s. There was no executive coaching. It was just called coaching. It wasn't even called executive coaching. And I said, "What does that look like?" And he said, "Well, I work with small business owners, and I meet with them in person every 2 weeks for an hour. And they come over to my office, or I go over to them. Most of them come to my office. And he had 2 chairs, and I offer them counsel and advice from an outside perspective. But through time, I build cumulative context on the business So I become a kind of an extension of that leadership team. And I was like, I'm a punk kid. I was like, I don't know how to run a business. I don't know how to make payroll. I need some help. So I hired him as my executive coach. So Brett worked with me every 2 weeks for 8 years.
Wow.
So all the way through, all the rounds of financing, building and growing the business. And when I exited and we sold the business, the end was not an end I would have written or wanted. I was ready to sell the business and go on to what is now the Stagen Leadership Academy. And I got in contact with the Village Voice, which was in New York, which was the second big national chain. That was the chain that I resonated with their principles. And we started negotiations on them buying, because they wanted Dallas and they wanted to compete with the Observer because they were competing with them in other markets. And my investors called the owner of the Observer, and I wasn't allowed to talk about this for years. And now I guess I will talk about it. I don't know if I'm allowed to or not, but it's been a long time. And they called the Observer and said, we're in negotiations. We were just the beginning with the Village Voice, and they're going to take this paper and you're going to have to compete with them unless you buy it, and just you buy it and close it down. And so it was a multi-million-dollar deal over a phone call that I did not know about. And then they called me and said, the paper's getting shut down like Monday. Okay, it was like Thursday. This was my baby. This was my team. I had 45 full-time people by then. And I had to go in front of my team and say, not only are we shutting down a thriving paper that just got profitable, we're actually being bought by our sworn enemy, and they're going to come and shut it all down and literally take the furniture, take everything. And they're just going to there was no due diligence because they were just getting rid of us.
It's just done.
They wired the money. And it was like, I was in shock because that happened so abruptly, and it was not at all my plan. And I would still love it to be in business today, right? That would have been my preference. And so and there are still people that were in that room that feel like I was part of the plan to do that, that feel like I betrayed them. Like to this day, I see them occasionally around town and they like see me at the grocery store and they won't say hi to me. I mean, this is, so they were hurt by that. And so the paper was closed. The Dallas Morning News wrote a big article and they said, they're a failed business. Yeah, we bought some of their racks. That was the quote from the publisher who I fought with every day.
That's locker room material right there.
The publisher that I challenged because he was playing so dirty, the local publisher, I challenged him to a fist fight at the flagpole at an elementary school, and it was in like ad week because he didn't show up, and I had my ball and my whole team, and I was like, because he was playing so dirty for so many years, I was like, if you want to play dirty, let's fight. Let's actually fist fight. And we got.
I love this conversation so much. He's walking somewhere between intense and competitive, and sometimes the rivers do meet.
Sometimes they do. My youthful self is coming out. And
I love it. It's you.
So yeah, for sure. And so the paper got closed.
Wow.
I got no money from that. My investors basically got their money back and they got a return. And if I kept my mouth shut for whatever the term was, 3 years, and couldn't say anything, I had a gag order for all intents and purposes, I got a little bit of compensation. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars over 3 years, which at the time was a lot because I didn't have any money.
Correct.
So,
and you're married and have 2 daughters.
No,
you're not married. Okay.
No, this was my wife would have never, never gone near me. And so I decided this is a chance to start completely over.
Okay.
Right before I met my wife. And what do I want to do? I've been so impacted by having a coach. Why don't I get on the other side and work with entrepreneurs and business owners to be the resource that Brett was to me? And I went out and I started speaking and I started doing team building. And and this is the part of the story that I don't normally talk about, which is I was like, well, if Tony Robbins can do the firewalk, I can do the firewalk. I went to California. I got certified as a certified firewalk instructor. I opened up the Texas Firewalk. My business actually started as a firewalk company.
No way.
And it was doing great, but that was still in Dallas, Texas.
Burned.
Yeah, no one was getting burned.
Does this involve you and Rick Sapio firewalking competition at some point?
He did firewalk, but no competitions. And so we did and I started doing this kind of Tony Robbins thing. And I was in Vegas. I had a speaker bureau that was sending my VHS tapes around.
Yeah,
Within a year, I was in Vegas in front of 5,000 people giving a keynote speech.
Yeah.
So I had the inspiration, but I realized whether I was doing firewalking for 2 hours at night or a 45-minute keynote speech in Vegas, I was in the entertainment business.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't want to be in the entertainment business. Brett wasn't in the entertainment business. Brett helped me, like a personal trainer, grow and develop and build capacity and become resilient. I need to actually, pivot. And I called Brett and said, let's actually work together. I'll do the sales, the marketing, the promotion, because I have all this magazine and event experience. You do the curriculum and content design, and we'll actually complement each other. And we basically created together what is now the Stagen Leadership Academy. And so fast forward 25 years, we'll have over 3,000 leaders go through various programs, both where they fly to Dallas to our facility to train with our team. We've got about 60 people on our team, psychologists, psychotherapists, executive coaches, business practitioners, and obviously our support team. And we'll also go out into the field and cascade our programs down into their organizations. And so we're touching a lot of lives. And this is, people think I'm joking when I say this. It took 2 decades to run the warm-up lap. It literally took 2 decades just to get limber, okay? And to stretch and say, okay, I remember it was 5 years ago. I remember looking out the window. Our facility is on Turtle Creek, really close to this office. And I was looking onto the trail, and it was a January before people came back from work. And I was like, oh, that we just started. So I am a startup. And that feels so inspiring and so invigorating because we're doing something that's very new in the marketplace. And even though we're working with highly credible, mostly family and founder-owned and ESOP-owned businesses across North America, we are doing the type of work that we're doing with powerful, accomplished people is unusual because we're doing the deep inner work. This idea of conscious leadership is an inside job. Like conscious capitalists are conscious leaders, but conscious leadership is about the inner game, not just the outer game. And that's emotional intelligence. And that's the ability to live a more integrated life. And so yeah, here we are.
I have 1,000 different questions. I'm going to start with this one here on that. I feel like, especially Rand, you talked about who you all work with, family owned, maybe second generational type. Think about the reps that you and your team have. How do you help leaders identify blind spots and then what to do about them?
One way that we help leaders to identify their own blind spots or the gap, if they were a boxer, there's sort of gap in their game, right? So I'm in the ring, you and I are in the ring.
Great analogy, love that.
You and I are in the ring, and we're sparring. And you're my favorite sparring partner if I'm a high-performing athlete because you're the one sparring partner that's actually able to expose my weakness. Whenever I do this one thing, you hit my head, and I'm like, how is he getting through? Well, instead of getting another sparring partner, I want to work with the partner that's actually revealing my gap, my edge, my blind spot. And so what we say to our clients, and this is very unusual, the reason we don't work with public companies typically is we will only work with a new account, a new customer, if the CEO goes first, because leaders go first. And our only program for a new customer is the program that Scott and Mark went through, which is a 52-week practice-based intensive. If we were a gym, we'd be a CrossFit box. High accountability, no bullshit. I don't know if you can say that, but you can edit that out. And about results and about real change and transformation. And so I'm going to give you the simplest and the most painful answer to this.
Okay.
When our clients catch themselves complaining, traffic, their spouse, their kids, work, the weather, anything, that's an opportunity to notice in the moment of complaint that I have given up my own agency, that I actually am in that moment in a victimhood orientation. Life is happening to me, and the only reason I complain, I don't have to say it out loud, the only reason I complain, even in my mind, is because I feel victimized, persecuted. I'm being persecuted by something. And so we say that's a chance for you to take responsibility. Every time we complain. So how often do you think you complain on a daily basis, every day? It doesn't have to be out loud. How often?
5 times a day.
Yeah.
Okay. Probably more than 5 times a day.
Yeah. That's what I'm aware of.
And here's the answer, here's the best answer that I get is people who say, one time someone said, I know the answer. And I said, I know the answer. And he said, a lot. Mm-hmm. Right? I complain a lot. Yeah. Complaint is actually when you ask about how do you see your blind spot, complaint. Because the people who are in our lives are actually there mirroring us. And so when I have an executive who's not performing, and I go to my YPO or YEO or my friends, my forum, and I say, man, I'm frustrated. We're having a glass of wine. What's going on? My CFO, she just isn't giving me the kind of information I need to make good decisions. She's completely incompetent. She's not performing. And I'm just moaning and bitching and whining about my CFO. And what I say to the person who wants to process that complaint with me, who hired the CFO? And they don't like that question. Mm-hmm. And then I say, who's the person responsible for making sure that everyone on your executive team is in the right seat on the bus, and that if they're in the right seat and they're underperforming, they're getting the support, the coaching, the mentorship, and the development to step up and to level up to your expectations? And the answer is you. Mm-hmm. So leaders get the organization they deserve. Yeah. Leaders get the team they deserve. Mm-hmm. And when people complain about their executives, about their customers, about their coworkers, you're asking, how do we help people reveal where their blind spots are? It's right there. It's right there. Because when we project and we make it about the other person, we're actually giving up responsibility to say, what a gift. Mm-hmm. What a gift to have people all around me who are constantly revealing my blind spots that express themselves as complaining. Now let's talk about our spouses, okay? At times, my wife and my teenage daughters are unquestionably the best teachers in my entire life, because I find myself more frustrated at times with the family dynamics than I do with the work dynamics. Yep. And so I can make it about my wife, or I can make it about my daughter, or I can take responsibility and say, the only reason that I'm frustrated in this moment, defensive, angry, irritated, is because I have no other way to metabolize this behavior than to get angry and frustrated. And that's about me, not about them. And I'll ask people, what's wrong? She pissed me off. He really upset me. And I was like, whoa. He upset you? She pissed you off? Wait a second. Whose emotion is that? Oh, that's my emotion. Oh, so you are feeling pissed off, and you don't know how to make sense of that feeling, which is about you, not them. So you're going to project that onto them. There's your blind spot. What a gift. We're surrounded by these most amazing teachers that God has put into our path. And all we can do is say, wow, isn't that amazing that I have nothing right now except to get defensive or to get judgmental. Being judgmental is another form of this. Mirrors everywhere. And here's the cool part about being a leader. Leaders live in feedback-rich environments.
Yeah.
So there's feedback everywhere. When I walked in and met your new young team member at the front desk,
Mary Claire,
and I was like, a part of me was like, I was in habituation, and I was like, oh, I got to go. Where's the podcast? I got to get to the room, and there's an idea that with awareness there's choice, without awareness only habit. And so I was a little bit unaware when I got off the elevator. I said hello. I went through a kind of like nice to meet you. What's your name? And then I noticed in myself that I started to just transact. And then I paused because I was aware enough and said, okay, wait a second. I have a choice to be more curious. And I found out about, she went to Baylor, and I found out about how you guys, family friends, and what do you want to do? And she wants to be in the wealth management space, and this is her first job. Like, I got all this beautiful texture that I had to wait anyway, okay, before I ultimately was brought down to the third floor here. And so this is the work for leadership, is the leadership is about awareness. And with awareness, there's choice. And with awareness and choice, there's responsibility. And so at the end of the day, someone asked me a few months ago at a dinner, Rand, you have to define leadership in one word. I'd never been asked that before. It's got to be one word. And my word was responsibility. Leadership is about responsibility. But my responsibility is different if I have more awareness.
Yep.
If I'm higher up the mountain and I can see more, I have a different responsibility than if I'm lower and maybe ignorance is bliss. I'm below the cloud cover and I'm like, well, I can't see much here. And Scott's up on the top of the mountain and he sees something, whether it's an army coming our way, that he has a responsibility to actually tell us if we're a country that's being attacked, if we're going back before, technology, or if there's an opportunity out there. And so that's why we use the idea of elevation and of climbing the mountain. And for everyone listening, this work of developing ourselves, this work of becoming more aware, it can be very lonely because we want to take those that we love with us. We want to take those that are our buddies and our friends with us. But the reality is that the climb of leadership, at least in my experience, is a solo climb. And when you make a solo climb, you can meet other solo climbers at different camps on the mountain. But your friends, and especially your family, they didn't sign up for the climb. And yet we go home and we're like, we want to share everything with our family and with our buddies. And we have clients all the time who tell us how disruptive the work that we do with them is in their marriages and in their family systems and in their friend and social systems. Because if you've been drinking with your buddies 2 days a week after work, every week since you were in college together for 25 years, and now all of a sudden your priorities are changing because you're seeing things in new ways and you're starting to make different choices with different responsibility, your buddies might be like, oh, you're too good for us now? Oh, you're too, and dealing with that is in learning how to process that is very difficult, which is why we work with leaders on how they're in relationship with life, right? It's not what's happening in the world, it's how I'm relating with it. And so those are, a little bit deeper from, let's go back and talk about fraternities.
No, it's
incredible.
It's phenomenal. Change is hard.
Change is hard.
And I love the fact that your comment, Rand, that we're surrounded with feedback opportunities and amazing stuff. Rand, incredibly grateful for your vulnerability, your honesty.
I expected nothing less.
Yeah. Thank you for spending time with Decision Points. Have a great rest of the day.